Hey, I'm Warren Sprouse. This is the Bible Forum. We're here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. We look at life through a biblical lens, and we missed you. We're talking about Black Lives Matter and other canards. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. I was downtown this past week, and there was a Black Lives Matter demonstration on the streets. I didn't see it on the news. I guess they didn't tell anybody what they were going to do. Nobody showed up, or maybe it's just because it's happening too often, or maybe it's because in Charleston we don't care. They're not impressing us at all. But I think that unless you've been in a coma or living in a van down by the river, you know the slogan, Black Lives Matter. And you know that slogan more than you know pretty much any other slogan you cannot deny without admitting that you're a racist. If you say Black Lives don't matter, then you're part of the problem. But they're saying that Black Lives matter more than anybody else. And nobody accepts that except these radicals. Well, they're punishing the rest of us because everybody knows that cops are killing black people at will, and that more black folks are killed by cops than any other racial group. Is that true? Harvard economics professor Ronald G. Fryer is a black man. He has prepared a new preliminary study that looks at police shootings in several major cities over a 15-year period, and he has found that there are, quote, no racial differences, end of quote, when officers have to draw a weapon and fire at an individual. His research is covering more than 1,000 officer-involved shootings, and it reveals that though there might be racial bias when officers use other types of force, pushing a suspect to the ground, for example, there was no indication of racial bias when officers fired their guns. Fryer's research also revealed that officers were more likely to shoot a white suspect than a black one. Apparently, black police officers use their hands 2,165 times for every 10,000 stops in New York when the interaction is with blacks, but only 1,845 times with whites. Does that make them racist? Or does that make blacks more likely to get frisky? For those totals, 10,000 stops, officers drew their weapons 155 times with black folks. They drew their weapons 129 times with white folks. They pushed blacks to the ground 136 times and whites 114. They pointed their weapon 54 times if it were a black person, and 43 times with a white. But the gap for shooting at suspects was non-existent. Have you heard any of this on CNN, NBC, ABC? Does Al Sharpton know about any of this? Louis Farrakhan? Do either of these men care? The study reveals that fewer than 400 people are killed every year by cops. And out of the 400, 61% of them are white. 90% of murdered blacks are murdered by other blacks. A police officer is 18.5 times more likely to be killed by a black male than an unarmed black male is likely to be killed by a police officer. Black males have comprised 40% of officer killings in the past decade, even though they have made up only 6% of the population. More than 6,000 blacks are murdered every year, yet only 4% of black homicide victims are killed by police officers. Can you do the math? That's just over 240 out of over 6,000 opportunities. Black folks make up 13% of the population. The males are about half that. And yet these folks are dying at a rate more than 8 times that of whites and Hispanics combined. Up to 75% of black children are raised without fathers. Dallas Police Chief David Brown mentioned this in a recent press conference, saying that law enforcement is often unfairly expected to deal with many of these damaged individuals who turn to crime after growing up without discipline, guidance, and role models. He was also the guy that asked for more black police officers. You think Black Lives Matter? I have applications. We need cops. Come over here, work over here on this side. The Department of Justice has found that 85% of violence involving a black and a white is black on white. Hardcore deniers don't accept FBI statistics. But here's a black Harvard economics professor saying the same things. In fact, a sophisticated 2014 University of Washington study determined that officers, though they often felt more threatened by black suspects, actually hesitate longer to decide to shoot armed black suspects than white. The biggest problem in race relations today is not the cops. It's not racial bias. The biggest problem in race relations today is blacks killing blacks. Can you say Chicago? Why doesn't Black Lives Matter address that? Well, the answer is simple. It doesn't serve the agenda. America, and indeed the entire Western world, is in a death spiral. The majority populations have been conditioned to embrace all things profane, communist, atheist, opportunistic, etc. And while they're doing all of this, the majority population is paying the bills. The minority population, they're playing the games. Today, the minority population is a term embracing any and all who do not have an education, any and all who do not care about a good job. They want the money, they don't want to do the job. Any and all who do not care about history, law, or biblical religion. I talked to a black woman in business, I think it was 2 weeks ago. She complained about the young adults that she had to work with, black and white. They won't do what they're told. They won't follow through. They don't seem to care. She's older, different generation, and therefore more responsible. She's having to pick up the slack. It's no coincidence that the character and the education and the history and the law and the biblical religion are the very principles upon which our country was founded. It's no coincidence that it's biblical principles that are being attacked. It's no coincidence that lives are being sacrificed on the altars of convenience. Can you say abortion? Abortion on demand. Can you say euthanasia? Transgenderism? Cremation? Same-sex unions? And the list goes on. There's no coincidence that all of these fly in the face of God's standards. Along that same line, have you heard about the Back the Blue Act? following the chaos and carnage that we watched here in the last few weeks regarding police officers and snipers and all the rest of it. 3 Southern senators have proposed a bill that would ensure criminals receive due punishment for attacking police. Ted Cruz, John Cornyn, Thom Tillis. You may not know Tillis, he's from North Carolina. They want cop killers to face federal charges, not local, not state. They cite the dangers these officers face every day. They highlight the new and more dangerous world in which we live. They illustrate with the current spate of cop killings. And they are mindful of the cloud that often covers the facts in these cases. And so these senators propose a new federal crime for killing, attempting to kill, conspiring to kill a federal judge, a federal law enforcement officer, or federally funded public safety officer. That pretty much includes every cop in America. The offender would be subject to the death penalty and a mandatory minimum sentence of 30 years for murder, with a minimum sentence of 10 years for attempted murder. It creates a new federal crime for assaulting a federally funded law enforcement officer, with escalating penalties, including mandatory minimums based on the extent of any injury and the use of a dangerous weapon. It creates a new federal crime for interstate flight to avoid prosecution for killing, attempting to kill, conspiring to kill a federal judge, a federal law enforcement officer, or a federally funded public safety officer. The offender would be subject to a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years. The bill also strengthens police officers' ability to protect themselves, giving them authority, for instance, to carry firearms into federal facilities. Citing the current events, Senator Cornyn said, "Law enforcement officers selflessly put their lives on the line every day to protect our communities, and in return they deserve our unparalleled support for the irreplaceable role they serve. The Back the Blue Act sends a clear message that our criminal justice system simply will not tolerate those who viciously and deliberately target our law enforcement. As our country continues to grieve following last week's tragedy in Dallas, we must come together in support of those who risk everything to keep us safe." What do you think? Do you think you can support something like that?